For those of you who don't really know the Enneagram, you're new to Tritype. I originally discovered Tritype when I was doing research on the internal experience of type. And I ended up with two bodies of work. The Tritypes and the Tritype stackings, all that came out of that 1994-95 research. And at the same time, I found Tritype. What did I find? Well, I noticed when I was interviewing person after person after person that they had the core fears of three types, not just one. Now, at the time, I already knew core fears from other work I had done prior to learning about the Enneagram. I already knew microexpressions. I already knew body language. I already knew faciology. I already knew archetypes. I knew Myers-Briggs. I knew many, many systems. So when I was doing these interviews, I had a really great opportunity at the first conference, Enneagram conference, to meet a lot of people and get master lists of people that would be familiar with their type. And then my research broadened a great deal rather than, the few hundred people that I knew. But what I found is that people consistently had types, and way too many, that were not connected by a wing or a line of connection. So I'm thinking, well, why is this core fear so prevalent, so strong? And because I had developed an in-depth inquiry process to interview people in another context, they would get to these answers very quickly. And they didn't know the clusters of core fears that I did, and neither did other Enneagram people because they hadn't done that research. But I identified the clusters I had found and what type they were, matched some of what was out there and added more. So if someone, for example, was a 7 and they identified with the fear of being trapped, limited, in some way inferior, etc., that's clear. Look like a 7, sound like a 7, talk like a 7 using the idiomatic expressions that 7s like to use, and so forth. That was fine. And if they had the core fears of 8, that would be fine because it could be a wing type. But when they would have core fears of the 4, there's no connection. 7 has no line to the heart center at all. And obviously no line to 4. So this happened too consistently. So I started just tracking it and asked people, hey, have you noticed this pattern? And a lot of people would just say, yeah, Katherine, I'm not looking at things the way you are, and I'll watch for it. So it took a while before I had enough people that we could confirm their tritype. I used it with clients because I discovered if there was a dilemma, a struggle that the client was facing, if I worked with all 3 types together and introduced that, they could resolve issues or understand their issues much more rapidly and completely. So I knew there was something to it. And then I had the good fortune of meeting a teacher under the Eureka system, which was Oscar Chazo's work. And she was doing a presentation on his psychocalisthenics. It wasn't even about tritype. Originally, I called it 3 types, by the way, and tri-center. However, while she was giving this little morning event, she mentioned that she was so glad that Chazo had added the trifix because even though she was a 5, she knew she had the visceral energy, especially when angry, of an 8. And before, she just attributed it to a line of connection. But when he added trifix, that was the fixation of each center, she was able to see why it was so dominant and why in the beginning the 8 and 5 seemed so close for her. Now, Echazo did all the typings for people, but I just said, wait a minute. Okay, that's someone else, 3 types, 1 from each center. I've found the same thing. And then I asked her if there was any place I could find any information on that. And she said no, that he'd only just recently started telling people their trifix. And so I was lucky enough to also have met Jack and Andrea, who at the time had the Enneagram Monthly. They had interviewed Echazo in Hawaii, and their publication on that visit came out in December and January, where there were 2 paragraphs on trifix. I thought, okay, it's really the same. So I thought, there's no point in pursuing the name 3 types or tricenter when it already existed in a way, but we just didn't know about it because it was after the original dissemination of the Enneagram. Having said that, my research was based on the whole type. And I didn't fully understand at first that Echazo only identified the fixation of each type, not the passion, not the conviction, not the dynamics between the type and their wings or their lines of connection. It was just the fixation. So then there was a dilemma because my research had revealed it's the whole type, the whole dynamic aspects of the type. So then it became clear that even though Echazo and I identified that we use a type from each center, which was very meaningful because at the time that was not known. And 2 and 4 and 5 and 7 were 4 of the 9 types that did not have a line to one center or another. Like the 2 and 4 did not have a line to the head center, and the 5 and 7 did not have a line to the heart center. So I thought this is meaningful because we all use our heart, we all use our head, and we all use our gut. And we use understanding as a way to manage problems. We feel the intuition of our heart when we're feeling connected and bonded to someone, as well as when we feel separate. We feel it in the heart, that movement, the clenching or the expansion of the heart. And we also all use the visceral aspect of our gut to identify ways that we feel obstacles and how we do or don't move to get that obstacle out of our way. And then shortly thereafter, brain science revealed that executive function was available in the head. But they came to realize there were brain cells in the heart and brain cells in the gut. And then it made more sense. So these things were kind of evolving simultaneously. So Echazo had introduced the Enneagram of Personality with proto-analysis, which is what he called it originally, in 1970. Now, he'd been working on concepts with the centers long before that. So much evolved over time, but he did not identify that everyone uses all 3 centers. But eventually he did. When he referenced the term trifix early on, it was to name the system of 3 triads. And he called them instinctual triads, by the way. And if you say, wait a minute, that's confusing. Well, Naranjo told me that he was honoring Echazo's copyright and was using other terms to not interfere with Echazzo's work because he'd been a student of Echazzo and felt like, when I met him, he still felt like a student of Echazzo. So I continued my research. And then as I went through that research and started compiling more and more data using my testing instruments and correlating it with the adjectives, the words, pictures, and phrases that people gave me or sent in, which are the collages you can see. The 9 basic collages are on the website at katherinefauvre.com. But the rest you can find in the Tritype book. But it was fascinating the way they emerged. Now, a friend of mine was extraordinary in creating those first Enneagram maps, and then I just modified them. And she also took the words, pictures, and phrases from those 9 types that pertain to the 27 tritypes and started the structure. And then I got other pictures from people, and that's what you'll see. So it's the archetypal energy I want you to track, not so much a single word or phrase, but the way they come together.